When I was growing up, our house resembled a military camp. Discipline flowed through our veins no less naturally than blood, wrapping every day with a strict schedule and strict rules. My father, a college teacher, personified a strict commander. His word was the law, and his look was the silent verdict that we all learned to fear. He said that real discipline is the foundation of success, that only a firm hand can lead us to a brighter future. Julie, my older sister, was his ideal, an example of a perfect daughter, smart, obedient, collected and always ready to please. Everything that I could never and never wanted to become. I've always been drawn to checking boundaries. If Julie were the gold standard, then I would be the one who constantly checks to see if the standard is really gold, and not just gilding. At dinner, Laura, the younger sister, sat straight as required, folding her hands neatly in her lap, under the gaze of her father, who demanded impeccable order. And I stubbornly slouched, rolled my eyes every now and then and, pretending not to hear his remarks, as soon as my father turned away, I resumed my free pose. It was a kind of game, a constant title battle between my desire for freedom and his determination to control. Mom rarely interfered in my arguments with my father, but that didn't mean she didn't notice. She was silent, but her looks were much more eloquent than her words. They talked about the disappointment when I chose clothes that she considered inappropriate, or friends that she disapproved of. For neighbors and acquaintances, Mom was a model of a strict educator, radiating cold aloofness and a look that penetrated everyone to the bone. Our house was a stuffy cocoon of rules, and I was looking for any loophole to break out. That's when I met Paul. I was 17, and he seemed like the embodiment of the freedom I dreamed of. He was 20, he was in college, and next to him I felt like myself, without judgment, without control. We kept our relationship a secret, meeting furtively away from prying eyes and other people's ears. It seemed to me that now I had a chance to build my life. My plans seemed almost a reality. I wanted to go to college and leave, to escape from the looming shadow of my father. But a few months after my 19th birthday, fate turned everything around. I started to feel sick in the morning. At first I thought it was stress before exams, because the pressure was great, and my thoughts were full of hopes and expectations. But every day it became more and more difficult to ignore these symptoms. One day, at a gas station, I decided to take a pregnancy test. Standing in the tiny bathroom, trembling, clutching the plastic strip in my hands, I prayed that it was just stress. But when the pink line appeared, my prayers went unanswered. I was pregnant. The next few days passed in a blur. My head was full of questions and fears that I couldn't get rid of. I knew I had to tell Paul, but every time I dialed his number, panic got the better of me and I dropped the call. Finally, realizing that I couldn't hide anymore, I arranged to meet him in our small secluded park, away from everyone. When he saw me, he had a warm smile on his face. But, noticing the expression on my face, it quickly faded, giving way to anxiety. "Laura, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching cautiously for my hand. I pulled back, hugging myself, as if hoping it would soften the blow of what I was about to say. "I'm pregnant," I breathed out, and the world around me seemed to freeze, leaving us alone in this moment. When the door slammed shut behind me with a heavy, booming sound, I was enveloped in a void so deep that it seemed bottomless. The whole world at that moment seemed to shrink to this emptiness, tearing me apart, where my every future moment suddenly darkened and disappeared into the unknown. I stood at the door, clutching my small bag tightly, as if it were the only anchor in a raging sea of pain and fear. The coolness of the night enveloped me, pierced to the bone, but even colder was the realization of complete rejection. My father's words thundered in my head, "You are dead to us," like a curse, like a sentence that I could not change. I didn't even know where to go, Who to look for comfort? Gender? I felt a pang of bitterness. He betrayed me as quickly and decisively as his family. I took a few steps down the deserted street. Every shadow seemed hostile, every sound was frightening. The city that I had known since childhood now suddenly became a stranger, gloomy, as if it had neglected me, like my family. I looked frantically back at the house, where the window panes flickered with a yellowish light, like eyes looking at me with cold indifference. And then I realized that there would be no return. Not now, not in the future. I didn't belong here anymore. My legs led me forward on their own, as if realizing that the time of doubt had passed, that from now on I had to rely only on myself. The sounds of the night city intensified. Somewhere in the distance, in a neighboring house, cheerful laughter was heard. A stream of warm light was pouring out of an open window. This sound, this alien comfort, cut into my heart like a sharp knife, making me tremble with the realization that I no longer have what others have. I found the nearest park bench and sat down on it, feeling a wave of fatigue roll over, but my thoughts were too stormy to allow my body to rest. Fear and confusion rolled in one after another like alternating waves. The future, which I considered my right, was melting away like smoke, leaving only a feeling of impending darkness. These words froze in front of my eyes, as if the black letters were imprinted on my heart with fiery brands. I read them over and over again, and in each word lurked the bitterness of betrayal, condensed into a sharp pain. Julie and Paul, two people who had once been my meaning and hope, now stood side by side, like indifferent witnesses to my exiled life, people ready to start their story on top of the wreckage of mine, without regret or hesitation. How could this have happened? Julie, my sister, the one who always looked at me with silent condemnation, which seemed to have grown into her features, was now going to link her fate with the man I once loved, with all my heart, naively and without reserve. They were standing next to each other, smiling in the picture. Her face shone with the usual concentration and dispassion. Next to him was Paul, the one who was so close to me, who whispered vows of love to me, who looked at me then as if I were the whole world to him. But now his hand was on Julie's shoulder with the same confidence and warmth that I once thought was mine. I imagined them in my parents' house, sitting at the very table where family dinners were once played out, where I constantly sought freedom and rebellion, where I listened to my father with restraint, and then defied his cool demands. Paul and Julie could be a part of this house, the completion of the picture of the perfect family that I could never be, but which they will now build. I took a deep breath, feeling this poison slowly pour into my consciousness. Inside, everything was burning with pain, misunderstanding, anger, and alienation, as if this engagement post had exposed a wound that I thought had been closed for a long time. My heart sank at the realization that I no longer had a place in their lives. My family once decided that I was their mistake, a disgrace that needed to be eliminated, and now they have erased me from their memory, leaving in my place a void that others have readily filled. A quiet breath, one more, and I felt that anger turn into a deep, unfamiliar determination. I forced myself to put the phone away, put it on the table, despite the itchy urge to reread the message again, absorbing the poison of betrayal to the last drop. The light of the evening sky flickered outside the windows, hiding the silence of my new home. My room, small and warm, seemed like a refuge in this sudden chaos. Turning to the crib, I saw little Jack snoring peacefully, his tiny hands clenched, his facial features relaxed and peaceful. My son. My little universe, the only pure and bright thing in this heavy, poisoned world. His breathing, even in calm, seemed to fill the air around with a soft light, as if by his very existence he dispelled my sadness and pointed out to me what was really important. I knelt down next to his crib, put my hands on its edge, without taking my eyes off his gentle face. Everything that once seemed inevitable to me, the opinion of my family, their demands, condemnation, suddenly lost its significance, turned into an echo of the past, which had no power over the present. I knew that now I didn't have to go back to those who rejected me, who decided that they could sever ties with the same coldness with which they sever unnecessary papers. Everything that mattered now lay in front of me, peacefully snoring in the crib. It was my future, my destiny, the meaning that they tried so hard to suppress and destroy. In the photo, Julie was smiling, wrapping her arm around Paul's shoulders, the same Paul who once became my hope, and then, in an instant, turned away from me and our child as from a random passerby. They looked so happy, their smiles shone with genuine joy, their eyes sparkled in unison, as if the world around them was full of only sunlight and serenity, as if there were no shadows and bitterness in their past, as if nothing had happened. A wave of dull, heart-piercing indignation and pain rose in me, and I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to hold back the tears that came. Images flashed before my eyes of those days when I looked at Paul, full of hopes and dreams, when I first told him about our future child, about our Jack. He turned away and then threw words cold and ruthless as stones, destroying my dreams of love and support. I did everything to cope with this pain, to move away, to live my life, but this picture, like an old scar, reminded me of the past again. I opened my eyes, my shoulders sagging with the weight of my thoughts, but then I saw Jack, my little Jack, playing nearby in his crib. He laughed, loudly and serenely, his face shone with such innocent joy that my heart was filled with a warm feeling that drove away all the shadows of the past. And then I realized something important. I don't need their approval. I don't need their love. I don't need the approval of the world that turned away from me. Everything I really needed was here with me every day, filling my life with meaning and joy, above all betrayals. Years filled with worries and difficulties passed. They flew by like in a fog, when my days merged into an endless series of diapers, textbooks, and sleepless nights. Studying at college was a difficult ordeal, especially the last semester, when I decided to take extra classes in order to finish the courses on time, while simultaneously working in a restaurant and taking care of 5-year-old Jack, full of energy and childish curiosity. Graduation day has arrived, the day I've been waiting for so long, dreaming of it as a symbol of a new beginning. Standing in line for my diploma, I looked around, and among the wave of the crowd I saw Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott, beaming with pride. Jack was sitting on my uncle's shoulders, excitedly waving his arms, trying to catch my eye and, noticing me, waved even harder. His smile was so carefree and bright that I felt my heart contract with happiness. After the official ceremony, we went to a small celebration that Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott organized in my honor. While we were celebrating, Evelyn, my boss from the restaurant, called me aside, her gaze full of friendliness and approval. "Laura, I have a suggestion for you," she said with a smile that seemed promising. "I'm looking for a new restaurant manager and I think you're perfect for the job." I froze, shocked by her words. Having worked as a waitress all these years, I could not even dream of something like this, and she continued, noticing my surprise. "You are so much more than just a waitress, Laura. I've seen how you handle difficult clients, how you organize staff, how you manage time and take care of your son, combining study and motherhood. That's the dedication and skills I need." These words were like a reward for me, a gift for all the difficulties I had gone through. Constant work with decent pay and flexible schedules has been a real blessing, opening a new page for Jack and me, an opportunity to build a stable and happy future. As the years passed, they were full of positive changes. I plunged headlong into my new role as a manager, learning all the intricacies of the business, enjoying more and more the stability that this job has given me. Jack grew up a curious and thoughtful boy. He loved to read, ask questions, and was always ready for new discoveries. He joined the school baseball team, where he learned to play, run, and laugh, finding friends and getting the first lessons of friendship and responsibility. One day, At a Little League game, I met Frank. He came to watch the game, rooting for his son Tyler, who played for the opposing team. We started talking, and I was immediately attracted by his kind eyes and a light, warm smile. I noticed that he came alone, and with a slight surprise I asked if he was a lonely father. Frank nodded, and a shadow of sadness crossed his face. Yes, my wife, Tyler's mom, died when he was a baby. His words touched something deep in my soul, and I quietly replied that I understood how hard it was, sympathizing with him with all my heart. Our relationship developed slowly, cautiously, and perhaps this was exactly the kind of caution that we both appreciated. We both went through losses and disappointments, both were careful, protecting our hearts and, above all, taking into account the interests of our children. But every month I noticed that I was finding in Frank not only a friend, but also a man whom I gradually fell in love with for his kindness and patience. Jack and Tyler got along as easily as we did, and sometimes it felt like our lives were starting to fit together like two puzzles that finally found their places. A year later, when our children were running around the yard playing their eternal adventures, Frank took my hand and simply, without any drama, asked me to become his wife. Our wedding, small and cozy, was attended only by the closest friends and relatives. As I walked down the aisle with Jack standing proudly next to me as a ring bearer, I saw Aunt Kelly's eyes glistening with tears. Her smile was so warm, so sincere, that my heart felt incredibly light. A couple of years after our wedding, our family became even bigger. Our daughter, Betty, was born on a warm spring morning, when the trees outside the hospital window were just beginning to turn tender green. Her tiny, defenseless body lay in my arms, and her breathing seemed like a magical melody that poured into my soul like the purest and most endless feeling. Frank, Jack, and Tyler gathered around my cot, all three of them with shining, joyful eyes, and at that moment I felt something completely new, complete and deep, a sense of completion, a feeling that now my family is finally whole, that I have found my home, found my place in the world. I loved all three of my children equally. Jack and Betty, my family, and Tyler, my stepson, blood didn't matter. Each of them has become an integral part of my heart, part of a single, large and loving family. We were connected not just by blood ties, but by strong threads of trust, care and the path we had experienced together, the path that gave me more than I could ever have dreamed of. Aunt Kelly often came to help me with the children, always cheerful and active, always ready to support, laugh and calm me down. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Kelly and I sat in the living room in front of the TV, enjoying the rare moments of silence. But suddenly the screen caught our attention, a familiar voice that echoed through my memory, making me freeze. On the screen was my father, standing on the podium, addressing the assembled crowd with a determined, commanding expression, with the very look that always struck fear into me. A running line under the image read, "Adam Johnson is running for mayor." It has been so many years since I saw my parents that their faces have become something ghostly in my memory, almost faded. But here he is, in front of me, a little older, with gray streaks in his hair, but with the same confident, stern look. He talked about family values, about morality, and I couldn't believe my ears. Inside, everything turned upside down. This man, who had once thrown me out of his life, was now talking about family ties and loyalty. I felt Aunt Kelly stiffen next to me, her face contorted with anger. "Hypocrites," she hissed in a voice trembling with rage, tearing her gaze from the screen and turning it to me. "You need to know something, Laura." Her words sounded restrained, but I felt that there was something heavy behind them, something that had been hiding under the surface for a long time and was waiting in the wings to come out. "What are you talking about, Aunt Kelly?" I asked, feeling a cold lump of fear form in my chest. She sighed, looked away for a moment, but then looked me straight in the eye again. "Laura, many years ago, before you and Julie were born, your parents had another child. A boy." Her voice trembled slightly, and I felt my insides tighten. "But he was born with severe physical disabilities. He had no legs. Instead of loving and caring for him, your parents left him in the hospital, too afraid that he would bring them shame. They abandoned him." Her words pierced me like red, hot needles. Each word is a new blow, opening invisible wounds in my soul. Shock and bewilderment mixed in a whirlwind of emotions. I tried to imagine this brother, whom I never knew, but who, it turns out, has always been a part of my family, a part of my past, which my parents abandoned for the sake of their image. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked, unable to control the tremor in my voice, feeling tears coming to my eyes. Aunt Kelly looked at me with pain in her eyes, and tears sparkled in her eyes, reflecting all the guilt and suffering that she had hidden all these years. "I'm sorry, Laura. I didn't want to add to your pain after everything your parents did to you." That night, when the children had been asleep for a long time, I made a decision. I have to find him, this brother I never knew, but who was a part of me. With Frank's support, we hired a private investigator, and the following weeks dragged on painfully long. Finally, we have a lead. My brother was alive, and no matter what, his life turned out happily. He became a successful writer, was married, and raised children. Fate gave him a chance that our parents did not give, adopting him into a rich family full of love and care. Meeting him was something surreal. When he entered the room, in his face, despite all the differences, I saw myself, some echoes of our common blood. His name was Larry, and he hugged me with a warm smile, saying simple words that will forever remain in my memory. "I always knew that I had a family somewhere. I just never thought that I would find a sister." Over the next few months, we became closer, as if all those years that separated us had suddenly disappeared. I introduced Larry to my family, Frank, Jack, Tyler, and little Betty. They all accepted him with open hearts, with the warmth that I had missed so much at the time. His wife, Julia, it's a funny coincidence that her name was the same as my sister's, and their 2 children became part of our extended family. 22 years had passed since my parents kicked me out, and life continued its inexorable course, bringing both joys and sorrows. But now I had a real family, those who were always with me. My Jack turned 20, he went to college on a baseball scholarship, and I was proud of the kind of person he had become, honest, purposeful, and kind. I felt hundreds of eyes turn to me when Larry pointed at me, and the whole room, which a moment ago was filled with a hum of whispers and movement, froze in silence. My brother, my long-lost brother, proudly called me his sister, openly and without fear, and I felt my chest fill with a warm feeling as I stepped out of the shadows and stepped forward. Every step was not easy for me. Thoughts of the past flashed through my head, memories of how my parents disowned me merged with the feeling of retribution that overwhelmed me. It was our moment of truth, the moment when I could finally say what had been accumulating in my soul for years. I stopped halfway to the stage, meeting my father's gaze. A shadow of recognition flashed across his face, brief as a flash, and almost immediately extinguished. He put on the mask of a politician again, implacable and confident in his rightness. My mother, sitting next to me, gave me a short, cold look, as if I was just a casual acquaintance, a reminder of some long-forgotten inconvenience. And Julie, my sister, whom I once loved as only a sister can be loved, sat looking at me with indifference, as if I were an empty place. But none of that mattered anymore. I went up on stage, walked up to Larry and, taking his hand, felt his strength and support. He hugged me, and I heard the crowd applauding. It was more than just a formality. It was a recognition of us, both of us, as a real family that could no longer be hidden. Larry looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the same determination as in me, the same pain and, finally, the same joy that the truth had come out. He smiled at me, and looking into the hall, he began to say, "My sister Laura was the one who found me. She was my beacon that guided me to the truth that I have been searching for all my life." The audience held its breath, and after looking into Larry's eyes for a moment, I spoke. My speech was simple but full of bitterness. Many years ago, my family abandoned me, leaving me alone with my fears and pain. But now I have a real family, people who accept me for who I am and demand nothing from me but sincerity. I am not here to reproach anyone, but to remind you that family is not just words. This is caring, this is support, this is love, which does not depend on circumstances and mistakes. I stood on the stage, feeling my voice, trembling with anger and pain, echo in the silence of the huge hall. The audience froze, everyone's eyes turned to me, and I felt their attention and sympathy becoming my support. All these years I've been silent, hiding the wounds deep inside, but now, finally, the truth has come out into the light, and there's no stopping it. When I called on my parents to stay, my father and mother froze, their faces turned pale, and their eyes became stunned. They were shocked, as if they couldn't believe that I had actually decided to reveal their carefully hidden secrets. Julie, who had always stood by her parents, looked at me as if she had seen a ghost, her face frozen, confusion and horror in her eyes. My parents huddled in their seats, trying to remain inconspicuous, but the crowd stared at them as if they were condemned by the whole city. I knew I wouldn't get a second chance now. This was my moment, my only chance to finally tell the truth. "Many of you knew how I grew up," I began, my heart pounding so loudly that it seemed to fill the entire room. "You knew my family, but there are many things you didn't know. Much that has been hidden for too long behind a facade of respect and respectability." I felt the strength growing in me, and my voice became firmer with every word. "My parents abandoned my brother when he was a baby," I said, and the room froze. "He was born with physical features that seemed to them not ideal enough, not suitable enough for their impeccable image. They rejected him because they were ashamed of their child." I paused, meeting the eyes of each of the people in front of me, seeing how shock and disgust were reflected on their faces. I turned to my parents, looking at them directly without turning away. And when history repeated itself, when I, their daughter, became pregnant at the age of 19 and needed support and understanding, they turned away from me. They demanded that I have an abortion, even knowing that it could leave me infertile. When I refused, they kicked me out, leaving me alone, pregnant, just to protect my reputation. The words fell from my lips, and I saw a rumble spread in the hall, as if I had thrown a stone into a calm lake. Sighs, muffled whispers, and looks of disgust were now directed at my parents. Some screamed, others talked indignantly, and the faces of the journalists gathered at the meeting reflected both shock and excitement from the unprecedented story. Journalists were rapidly taking notes. Someone even broadcast a live report, and at some point I realized that what had happened here would soon spread far beyond this hall. My father, once a formidable, important man, whose shadow had oppressed me all my life, now looked almost wrinkled, having lost his former confidence. He tried to keep his temper, but it was clear that he was shrinking inside, crushed by this sudden revelation. The mother openly cried, covering her face with her hands, unable to hide her emotions. Julie, whose face was frozen in an expression of shock and confusion, sat next to him, as if on the verge of running away, but was forced to remain under the gaze of everyone present. In the days that followed, the story exploded, making headlines and attracting national attention. My father's political career collapsed like a house of cards in just a few moments. A man who preached about family values and morality for many years was exposed as a hypocrite who built his life on lies and rejecting his own children. Within a week, he resigned as mayor, citing personal reasons, but everyone knew the true reason for his departure. The college where he taught hastened to distance himself, and soon he was fired, and his name disappeared from the list of teachers. In the midst of all this chaos, there was one revelation that made my soul sad and, at the same time, relieved. Julie made her choice. She stayed with our parents, turning her back on me, and I realized that for her I was still just a stain on their impeccable reputation. Julie stood by our parents, refusing to face the truth, as if she had become their mirror image over the years. During our short, sharp phone conversation, her voice trembled with rage. "You've ruined everything," she hissed like a snake spewing venom. "Don't mess with me anymore, you're dead to me, just like you are to Mom and Dad." Her hate-soaked words stunned me, but strangely enough, they didn't hurt me. The words, "you are dead to me," sounded like an echo of the pain that I had already experienced in the past, and now they only quietly closed the door between us forever. But life has a special ability to surprise us at times when we least expect it. A few days after talking to Julie, I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in over 22 years. I recognized it immediately, the number of Paul, the man who left me and our son, the man who became a stranger to me. I shuddered involuntarily, but I answered anyway. "Laura," he said, and his voice sounded hesitant, even timid, like a man who got lost. "I was thinking about us, about what happened. Julie and we can't have children. And I suddenly thought that maybe you and I still have a chance, maybe we could become a family." At first I froze in surprise, but then, as strange as it was, I couldn't help laughing. "Paul," I said, trying not to laugh, "you made your choice 22 years ago. You left me when I was pregnant with our child. You married my sister, and it's only now that you can't have children that you suddenly think of me?" My voice was quiet and firm. "No, Paul. I have a wonderful husband and a wonderful family. I don't need you, and I definitely don't want you in my life." He was trying to say something, his voice was shaking, but I didn't listen. I just hung up the phone, feeling calm and complete, which I hadn't known before. This conversation finally put an end to our past, closing the door that had stood half open for many years, clinging to the remnants of ghosts and regrets. I felt liberated. But the next day, the surprises continued. This time there was a call from Paul's parents. Their voice was timid, almost shy. "Laura?" "This is Lauren, Paul's mother," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We just found out about Jack. Is it true that we have a grandson?" I listened to her story with surprise. It turned out that all this time my parents and Paul assured them that I had an abortion and ran away, leaving no trace, no descendants. They spent many years believing this lie, thinking that their grandson never existed. "We'd like to see him," Lauren added, her voice cracking with hidden emotion. "But we understand if you don't want to let us into your life. It's your right." I thought about it, considering her words. Paul's parents weren't to blame for what he did, or for my parents lying to them. After all, they were deceived too. "Okay," I said, finally feeling strangely reconciled to the past. "I'll talk to Jack and see if he wants to meet with you." Jack's meeting with his grandparents turned out to be unexpectedly warm and touching. Lauren and her husband did not hold back tears, hugged him, as if their hearts had kept the void filled by this sudden discovery for many years. Jack greeted them with kindness, openly and without judgment. His pure joy and amazing maturity amazed me, and at that moment I realized that I had raised a strong, kind man who was able to accept people as they were. In the months that followed, our lives began to take on a new dimension. Larry and his family became frequent guests, filling our house with laughter and joy. The children played together like friends they had known for a long time, and we, adults, shared stories and memories, feeling the warmth of family love at every step, which had eluded us for so long. Aunt Kelly and Uncle Scott welcomed each new grandson, biological or not, as if all these children were their own blood. There were only fragmentary rumors about my parents and Julie. I was told that they left the city, hiding from shame and scandal, trying to escape from shattered illusions. Sometimes I thought about them, and deep down I even felt something like pity. But anyway, I knew I had done the right thing by revealing the truth.